Welcome to the Cognitive Crucible, produced by the Information Professionals Association. Our website is information-professionals.org, where you can find links and information about today's conversation and get access to members-only content. Join John Bicknell and explore all aspects of our generational challenge, cognitive security. The Cognitive Crucible is a forum that presents different perspectives and emerging thought leadership related to the information environment. The opinions expressed by guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views of or endorsement by the Information Professionals Association.
My guest today on the Cognitive Crucible is Tanna Krewson, who is a senior-level cognitive security subject matter expert, researcher, and sociocultural psychologist specializing in cognitive warfare, the information environment, and the impact of narratives and group identity on conflict, violence, and decision-making. Tanna Krewson, welcome to the Cognitive Crucible.
Hi, John. Thanks for having me. It's really great to be here.
Yep. Good to have you. So the conversation that I'd like to have with you today, Tanna, will cover cognitive warfare and related topics. But before we get into this, could we start by getting your overall comment or assessment of our strategic landscape, or if you like, the times in which we live?
Sure. I think, we all are aware that there's been a lot of progress in cognitive neuroscience, psychology, social science, and then information and communications technology, which has kind of fueled our ability to understand and interfere with the evolution of individuals, communities, societies, states. And these advances have enabled kind of this sophisticated intervention in and often manipulation of kind of individual and group emotions, identities, narratives, by really focusing in on our weaknesses and kind of exploiting our biases, reliance on heuristics. And all of this is compounded by this technological world that we live in, with all of these really rapid advances in how we acquire, use information, share information. And we live in this world where states no longer have to kind of cross national boundaries to wage war, to create conflict. This can be done from afar, which kind of changes the strategic landscape and changes the world in which societies and militaries interact. In essence, it kind of creates this whole of society problem that we're all dealing with, but it has these military and political implications when there are changes in societies created by adversarial manipulation. So it's this idea that individuals can now access more information from anywhere at any time, which increases interaction, but also kind of creates issues with information overload and the ability to mobilize resources and people rapidly.
Yeah, 100% on all that. We had a great episode a while back now. I'll put a link in the show notes with a fella named Josh Kerbel, who is part with the intelligence community. But he also makes the point, which I think you'd agree with, but also today, not everyone literally, but billions of people today are their own individual promulgators of information.
Yeah.
They're their own publishing outlets, right? Anybody can create accounts for various different platforms and just start putting their own ideas and thoughts and content, photos of what's happening, videos of what's happening on the ground where they are, and all of that is also contributing to the dynamics that you're describing. Would you say that's on target?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. So you are currently finishing up a PhD, all but dissertation, right, related to global conflict analysis and resolution. Do you think you could take a minute and just describe what your studies are, and then this will be kind of a bit of a scene setter into the rest of the discussion, I think.
Sure. So my background's in psychology, specifically cognitive psychology, and looking at how people make decisions and why we behave the way that we do based on the way that our brains function. So my PhD is looking at violent conflict, regular conflict, how conflict takes place between individuals, communities at a global level, and kind of the what impacts it, the things that lead to it, such as when we talk about narratives, backgrounds in trauma, just general community relationships with how communities exist in society, how they relate to the wider national society within which they're in. So that's kind of in a nutshell is looking at, I specifically am focusing on global and community conflict. So again, how does violence take place in communities? What are some of the drivers of it? And then how do you resolve it? So that's kind of in a nutshell what it looks like.
I see. I see. Well, so let's start talking a little bit more about cognitive warfare. What are some of the foundational brain science principles that underpin our susceptibilities to cognitive warfare? And also, how do those vulnerabilities manifest in society?
Sure. So one of the things that I've struggled with, because I've done a lot of work with the U.S. military and NATO on this idea of cognitive warfare, trying to develop what does this space look like? How do we deal with it? And one of the biggest difficulties I have right now in talking about cognitive warfare is really centering the brain within it. So one of the things that I feel like really needs to be better understood in this context is really the dominance of the subconscious mind and why we perceive things the way we do because of it. Because I know we all like to believe that we're logical all the time and that our kind of logical thought is separate from our emotions, but that's not actually how it works. So scientists have shown that our conscious mind is only responsible for about 5 to 10% of our decision making. So it's a very small part of actually what happens in our brain. The larger part of what happens in our brain takes place in our subconscious mind. So understanding this requires us to see that disinformation campaigns and other cognitive attacks are difficult to identify because we don't always realize that they're happening. Because a lot of times effective cognitive warfare campaigns, disinformation campaigns are actually targeting the kind of the back part of our brain, which is the subconscious part of our mind. And that's done when some of these campaigns specifically target our emotions. So we like to assume that we maintain conscious control of our thoughts and that our conscious mind is wholly interactive with and protected by and subordinate to the unconscious parts of our brain. But that's not true. What actually drives our thoughts is that subconscious part of our brain. And that's the part of our brain where the brain likes to live in, kind of. It's easier. Using our the logical parts of our brain take a lot more energy. So oftentimes what the brain likes to do is to kind of kick it back to our subconscious mind. It makes it easier. So when we receive information, we know this, and it'll drop it back to the subconscious. So reality is really kind of constructed in our subconscious mind.
I see. Is there any relation to what you're describing, Tanna, with the work of Kahneman and the whole thinking fast and slow
Yeah.
kind of a thing? I mean, that's like a really simple heuristic for describing, what is otherwise a really complex environment, the human
Yeah.
brain, and how we process and decide on information.
100%. So we may receive, understand, and even agree with logical messages disseminated by governing authorities or institutions that are considered reputable, but that doesn't mean that the message aligns with our subconscious thoughts or reality. So in that case, when it doesn't align with it, we're more likely to dismiss it. And conversely, when we're presented with information that does align with our subconscious beliefs or emotions, we're more likely to affirm it regardless of whether it's real or not. So as a result, when we fail to understand how segments of our population subconsciously perceive reality and make meaning of their experiences, we open ourselves up to exploitation and manipulation. Often through this results from things we're all familiar with, like cognitive biases, logical fallacies. Again, this is just the process of our logical brain will kick it back to our subconscious mind in these instances.
I see. How so? Kind of like moving along just a little bit. So, how has modern conflict evolved within societies due to the influence of cognitive warfare? And what are some of the societal dynamics at play that you and your colleagues have been uncovering over many years of research?
Sure. So, cognitive attacks are not new. We understand, propaganda has been successfully used in war for decades. And they're, offensive actions that are employed to achieve effects on perceptions, beliefs, interests, aims, um, designed to, in essence, control our behavior, change our behavior by deliberately targeting our mind. So in this instance, the mind is both the target and the weapon, because as you said before, that we all wind up kind of becoming our little promulgators of information.
Mm-hmm.
And this is exactly it. So our brains are targeted by adversaries, knowing that if I target you emotionally, I can change the way that you think and behave. We can see this when it comes to, at least here in the US, anytime an election cycle comes up, we have kind of all these awful campaign ads.
Mm-hmm.
If you notice, they no longer talk about issues, because if they talked about issues, that would require our brains to go into kind of, our logical minds would have to think about it, really kind of mull over the issues. Those ads don't do that. They specifically do character assassination. They play on emotions because that's easy for us to digest. And therefore, it's easier to try and get us to vote a certain way if it's this kind of fixation on emotions, things that make us have an immediate reaction. So that's what our adversaries, though, are doing to us on a larger scale when we talk about cognitive warfare. They understand that there are segments within our societies that may be disenfranchised, feel as if they've been left behind in society. And when you find that, it's very easy to poke at those things. They can use bots to flood the information environment with messaging that specifically targets those parts of society that are hurting, that feel left out. And when you target those parts, you can create anger. You can create protests. You can create movements. So
Yeah.
I,
And you're reminding me of another recent episode that we have with a gentleman named Bob Jones,
Mhm.
who works in Special Operations Command, the U.S. Special Operations Command. But he is a big proponent of just what you were talking about, Tanna, recognizing that there are grievances within populations,
Mhm.
and uh, those grievances need to be understood uh, for the legitimacy of those grievances need to be understood. I mean, at at the kernel of truth, right? The way people act on grievances may not be appropriate, but usually there is something to the grievance, and understanding that and honoring it and speaking to it is an appropriate is an important component of like societal healing. But
Yeah.
what you're saying from a cognitive warfare perspective, adversaries and politicians,
Mhm.
are very tuned in to what these grievances are, and they're just like pouring gas on them.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny because I worked in international development for a long time. And it's funny from that perspective, we know that after 60 plus years of kind of semi neo-colonial development policies that have arguably failed in many regards, that we're trying to recognize that societies are often not built from the top down, right? If you want to empower societies, you want to grow democratic societies, you need to work from the ground up by empowering and listening to local populations, local communities, giving them the tools to create change within their own contexts. But what I find interesting is we don't often see the reverse when it comes to cognitive warfare. So societies are being broken down using the same mechanisms that we recognize work when building up society. So they're kind of going against this traditional conflict and security discourse where it's focusing on state-to-state interaction and conflict. Cognitive warfare works at the grassroots level to sow discord and break down societies by going in from the ground up. If I can target those community populations, those small pockets within our nations that are disenfranchised, then I can effectively, from a long-term perspective, if I do it right, I can break down an entire population by pulling it apart at the seams. And that's what we're seeing. And so our failure to recognize that we're being degraded using the same approaches we recognize as effective in building societies, it's a problem. And the mechanisms are the same.
Right. Yeah, that's a really vivid image. Or you didn't say this exactly, but when you're talking, I'm conjuring up an image of like termites.
Mm-hmm.
And termites are like in the wood, in the foundation, in the walls, and it's they're they're not invisible, but they're harder to see than bombs dropping. But they are, doing, slow, steady, insidious damage to the, fabric of the structure or the fabric of society. It's really something. So what are some of the overlooked aspects of cognitive warfare that you've discovered and believe need more attention, particularly concerning brain science and social vulnerabilities?
So I think it's good that you mentioned what Bob said about needing to kind of better understand things within societies, and why they may act a certain way because of them. I think that's one of the most critical challenges that I've had when working with military audiences is um, getting to the core of this idea that what we think is not always the way that others think, and the way that we view the world is not the way that others view the world. And that at the end of the day, most of the time, and this is from people to communities to societies, people want to feel seen and heard. We all want to feel that at an individual level. We know the impact of great leaders. Great leaders have that ability of making us feel seen and heard, and we feel really good in that kind of presence. And that's what we need to be able to do at a higher level when it comes to societies. The other things are the ability to think about our thinking and therefore to think about the thinking of others, remembering that, again, they're not us and they probably don't see the world the way we do. So, for example, when we talk about terrorism, we need to understand that we're not dealing with people who are subhuman. They may do things that we find unthinkable. But in a lot of cases, we're dealing with people who have often experienced pretty horrible historical trauma. And, in a lot of cases, with the way that the brain works and processes things like trauma and historical narratives, that if we experience some of the same things, we might do unthinkable things as well. That they're not subhuman. We need to actually do the opposite and recognize that there are things at play that need to be addressed more constructively. So when I worked at the Carter Center for about 6 years, which was Jimmy Carter's international nonprofit. And we had a program there that was at the time when ISIS was kind of at its height, was looking at analyzing ISIS propaganda. And what they found was that most of it actually had nothing to do with Islam. The biggest narrative within the propaganda was belonging. And it was this idea of come into the brotherhood, we'll take care of you, you belong here, you're seen. And this is a critical component of cognitive warfare because it specifically targets segments of population who feel unseen, feel like they don't belong. And that's something that we need to do a better job of recognizing in our own societies if we have any hope of combating this kind of emerging threat.
Yeah, no, that's a great perspective. And do you think you could bring that into, how this intersects between like military doctrine and then the operational aspects of cognitive warfare?
Sure. So if you look at a lot of the doctrine, and this is US doctrine, I've spent a lot of time kind of working with NATO doctrine and some other nations. A lot of our doctrine is externally focused. So when you talk about, info ops, psyops, it's looking at messaging them out there. What messages are we sending to them to try and hopefully influence their actions, their populations? But what we're missing is cognitive warfare is internally focused. It's the operational environment is inside our own nations. And our kind of failure sometimes to understand and address the things that are going on in our own nations is what makes us vulnerable. That's where the gap is. And the doctrine is not looking at that. It's focusing on what can we do to hopefully influence their behavior. But that's missing the point of our inability to protect what's happening in here. Because again, cognitive warfare kind of goes in through society and then bubbles up with implications that we probably may not see coming. And by the time they've shown up, we don't even know where they originated, because cognitive warfare comes through society, but it gets picked up by the media. It gets picked up by politicians who are, hey, we can capitalize upon this. This serves my narrative because I want to get reelected. And eventually, it's very difficult to tell that the origins may have come from Russia. It may be from China. It may be from, any other group. But that's the thing. When we don't understand those weak points within our own populations, that's when we're the most vulnerable. And that's what I think we're missing when we talk about cognitive warfare. It's internal.
Yeah. The whole problem of attribution is just a huge thing that a lot of people are working on, obviously. Okay, well, so you're in an elevator ride with the President of the United States or other influential people, military leaders, mayors of cities, governors of states. What are the kinds of pieces of advice that you would give to these people relative to cognitive warfare and what they can do about it?
I think the first is collaboration. This is something that we increasingly know needs to happen, this collaboration between military, civil society, governance. There needs to be, but more talking, more systems to facilitate talking, but more from a. So when we talk about cognitive warfare, that makes it really challenging to say it's an internal problem, because it's a bit of a marketing issue when you say, well, it's cognitive warfare and we need to do something about our own populations because it creates this. So are you doing cognitive warfare on us? But I think it's, if we're countering cognitive warfare, we need to have a better situational understanding of our own populations. And to do that, the military needs to have more information about society. But the problem is the military is probably not the right entity to be collecting information about our own populations. So this is where collaboration comes in, that there are already civil society organizations, academia, who are able to collect information about society in an ethical way, a way that the population views as acceptable. So there needs to be better mechanisms for collaboration between the military, the government, and academia and civil society to be able to share some of this information. So in essence, we have baselines to better recognize when changes are taking place that suggest kind of malign influence and manipulation instead of just normal societal evolution. And with that comes the need for training. I mean, I could harp on this all day long. We need training that focuses on our personnel, not just decision makers, but decision makers need to have better training to understand the entire social media world that lower level soldiers exist in. Decision makers exist in it as well, but lower level soldiers live, these younger kids in some way live inside this social media environment, gaming environment, all of these different platforms that, frankly, higher level personnel don't even understand. So there needs to be better training for supervisors and higher level leadership that includes understanding how to recognize individuals within their ranks who may be at risk or under the influence of disinformation, and how to create better critical thinkers within our ranks who can understand when they're being manipulated. If they're watching a political speech, how do you recognize dog whistles in it? How do you recognize the subtext of what's being said? How do you discern opinion from fact? These are all things that need to be done if we're hoping to build resilience.
Yeah, that's a big agenda, but so necessary these
Yeah.
days. Some sort of like improved, this is not the right word, but approved literacy or something
Yeah.
related to how information is consumed and processed, decided on, et cetera, et cetera. Huge project for sure. Well, this has been fantastic, Tanna. You've given our audience a lot to think about, for sure. I'd like to start wrapping it up with a quick lightning round. 30 seconds or so per response, and most of these relate to the kinds of things that we've been talking about. So, first lightning round: the competition for attention.
So the competition for attention plays kind of a massive role in cognitive warfare because, frankly, we are all actively on social media, on our phones, always, and it is a competition for attention of kind of how can we capture and retain the public's focus amidst this overwhelming influx of information. And that's a lot of what, I mean, the systems that we're using are designed to do that. It's this competition for attention through algorithms. So the algorithms are created to put you in this echo chamber and to keep your attention focused on this platform, this topic, this. But that's in essence what allows cognitive warfare to flourish, because you are putting people in echo chambers, and you're grouping them amongst like-minded people through these systems, and kind of keeping their attention on certain topics. And when you do that, when you have the ability to maintain their attention, you can easily kind of tinker with their beliefs, their perceptions, their ideas of what's real. So it is kind of a continued problem.
Yeah. And I just had a thought about this. I mean, this is not revolutionary. The audience, our audience is going to be like, well, duh, John. But uh, uh, it, it just started dawning on me. So, like, like YouTube, right? YouTube has channels. There are people who are publishing stuff on YouTube all the time, and part of the reason why a lot of those people are doing that is because there is the opportunity to actually make money as a YouTube content provider. You can make a lot of money doing
Yeah.
that if you really have content that resonates with lots of people. But even if you don't have content that's like gets billions of views, you can still get money from YouTube as a content provider. And
Mhm.
as a consumer of that content, I don't pay any money to Google or to YouTube, but I am paying with my time and paying with
Exactly.
my attention. And in that way, people's attention is literally monetizable. And
Mhm.
if I subscribe to a channel, I'm basically telling that content provider, your content is valuable to me, and that also gets communicated to YouTube and to Google as a little like micro bit of value, which
Mhm.
ultimately gets monetized. So I'm not actually like putting my credit card in and saying, here you go, I'm subscribing to this for $10 a month or whatever. But just with my time and attention, it is being converted into dollars and cents, which is pretty amazing.
Well, there's another, I can't remember, a podcast I think I listened to about a year ago. I think it's called Down the Rabbit Hole. It's a New York Times podcast, which is all about that, about how the algorithms, particularly I think it was within YouTube, it looked at, are designed to keep you watching for longer, as much time as possible on that system.
Yeah, and I've heard the same. I've not actually seen the studies, but I've heard that there are similar kinds of atmospheric influence techniques for like so like for fast food restaurants.
Oh yeah.
I'm picking on like McDonald's or something. I don't know, McDonald's, Wendy's, Burger King, other fast food restaurants, but some of the color schemes that they use within those restaurants. Again, I've heard, yeah, and again, people might be like, John, that's urban legend. That's not right. But they use color schemes that help get people in and out faster, right? It's not about just hanging out at McDonald's all day long. It's about, come in, get your food, eat it, and get out so more people can come in, something like that. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Oh yeah.
Is that urban legend, or is there some cognitive science behind that?
No, I think there's actually absolutely truth behind that. I mean, there's lots of marketing techniques just like that. Even the whole thing of keeping the temperature to kind of a slightly uncomfortably cold.
Okay. Yeah. Sure. Yeah. And all of it, goes back to, helping the organization make more money. All right. Well, that that was a long lightning round. Okay. Next lightning round. Soft power.
This is something that I think, from a military perspective, we kind of continue to overlook a bit, because it plays a pivotal role in cognitive warfare, that kind of serves as a subtle yet influential tool in shaping international perceptions and relationships. But unlike hard power, which relies on obviously military and economic might, soft power co-ops rather than coerces, using things like cultural appeal, values, and policies to influence and attract others. This, in a military environment, is obviously it's less sexy than talking about bombs and bullets and tanks. But in cognitive warfare, soft power is a key strategy to crafting narratives that resonate with global audiences and establishing a positive, a positive ability of actors to kind of change society to, again, I don't need to cross into your nation to wreak havoc. If I can do it from afar, and I can basically make you attack yourself. Again, this is what's so, in my mind, frightening about it. But I think we continue to have this slightly, it's hard to say antiquated mentality, because we're dealing with, looking at wars in Ukraine and Israel at the moment that are, highly, highly kinetic. But the future of warfare is going to be more and more in this soft power space. And if we don't accept that, and more importantly, understand it, it'll be increasingly problematic.
Yeah, no, that's a good perspective there. Next lightning round, manufacturing want.
So this goes back to kind of a bit of what we talked about in the competition for attention. It's the same types of dynamics. So manufacturing want is kind of the sophisticated technique in cognitive warfare where desires and needs are artificially created or kind of amplified to influence behavior and decision making. So again, it leverages these deep insights into human psychology and behavior, using some of these targeted communication strategies to shape perceptions and create a sense of necessity or desire for certain ideas or actions. You could say, obviously, we think of this oftentimes related to products, but again, it's cognitive warfare. It's creating ideas and actions. So this approach is used to subtly steer public opinion, promote specific agendas, or manipulate behavior through exploiting vulnerabilities such as social influence, cognitive biases. And again, it's done en masse using these media and digital platforms to disseminate persuasive narratives.
Mm.
So it's people, I've heard a lot of kind of the criticism is, yeah, but this has always been done. This is just propaganda. That's what cognitive warfare is. Yes, in a way, but it is propaganda on steroids. And when you bring in AI into the picture now with deep fakes and the ability to you create realities that don't exist, and our brains are not designed to navigate this arena very well.
Yeah, 100% on all that. Last lightning round, complex systems, and if you want to tack in there, cybernetics.
So this, you and I had emailed back and forth a bit about, systems and managers and participants, and cognitive warfare, and I've been actively working on it for a few years now, continues to be a complex system that stumps me sometimes. I don't have all of the answers. I have ideas about the way that we need to look at it. But again, we're talking about a whole of society problem that has implications for our military, for our governance structures, our politicians. And it's not even just saying it targets society, because society is comprised of myriad other systems that are all being targeted in different ways. So recognizing who's responsible, who's participating, where things originate, is very, very difficult, especially when we're talking about things where I said this, narratives can be created by malign outside actors. They're put into society, and then it's picked up by actors within the society, though, who see this as, oh, we can capitalize on this, especially when we're talking about in the political realm where politicians are at the mercy of populations electing them. So this kind of creates this confusion over managers, participants, where things originate, and therefore how do we even see the whole system? I think that's the thing that I struggle with, is being able to see the entirety of the system.
Yeah, no, it's I think there's a lot of people that are struggling with that same understanding, or trying to understand the world as like nested, hierarchical, complex systems which are interacting with each other continually in ways that are nonlinear and difficult to predict, et cetera, et cetera. But nevertheless, this is the fishbowl that we're in, and yeah, huge challenge. And thankfully, there's people like you, Tanna, who are taking out the magnifying glass and really investigating how we can collectively orient on this challenge and mitigate it. So, did you have a comment there?
No, I was just going to say the one last thing is that I've spent a lot of time thinking about whether, we talk about societal resilience with this, whether we can build societal resilience the same way that we build individual resilience. And I think in some ways the mechanisms are the same, although I don't have the answers for that yet. It's just something I've been thinking about. But I think the first step with all of this, and something that I've wrestled with when working with militaries and nations, is similar to if we're in AA. The first step is, hi, I'm Tanna, I'm an alcoholic. It's the admitting that there is a problem. I feel like that's the first step that, to see the whole picture, needs to be done. But in some ways, I think we're still hesitant to do that as nations, as societies, because that would be admitting failure in certain regards. And so that's my, I guess, final thought of something that's a critical gap.
Yeah, no, totally agree with that. And I think kind of related to what you were just saying, and this is way back to the very beginning of this podcast. The very first guest that we had was Dr. Rand Waltzman, and
Oh,
I
yeah.
I haven't mentioned this in a while, but really one of my favorite ways of looking at this problem is something that I heard Dr. Waltzman say is that this entire problem space may be thought of as a chronic disease that
Yes.
where there is no cure, but it may be managed, right? And
Hmm.
so from that, for me at least, cascades, a whole bunch of useful ways of examining the problem to include, things that I heard you saying earlier, but you need like a soft power mindset. You need a campaigning, always on mindset here. It's not about kinetic power where you fire a bullet and you drop a bomb and then you say, okay, we're mission accomplished, right? It's not a mission accomplished kind of a thing. It's like it's a continual competition, kind of a dynamic that we all need to embrace and build that into our day-to-day way of engaging with this problem set as individuals, as communities, as states, as militaries, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, the idea with individuals that, and I harp on this all the time, that the big issue with the human brain is there's an arrogance about the human brain that is, I'm not vulnerable to disinformation. Those
Mm,
people are, though, but
mhm,
like I would recognize it when it's happening to me. But if we're all thinking that way, and arguably a lot of us are, it's it becomes problematic because even getting individuals to recognize their own vulnerability, um, if we can't do that, especially when it comes to decision makers, to seeing like I'm vulnerable, so are the soldiers underneath me,
mhm.
which means all of our decisions are vulnerable. Um, that's a starting point that I haven't seen
Hmm.
yet, or have seen, but not to the extent that I think it needs to be there.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. It's a work in progress.
yeah,
That is for sure.
yeah,
Um, Well, do you think we could get from you, Tanna, a book recommendation? It could be related to the kinds of things that we're talking about, or it could just be what is on Tanna Krewson's nightstand right now.
sure. So, an author that I really love is Leonard Mlodinow, who he is an astrophysicist by training, I believe, worked with Stephen Hawking's, and he wrote two amazing books. The first is Subliminal, How Your Unconscious Mind Rules Your Behavior, and the other is Emotional, How Feelings Shape Our Thinking. So both of these books are outstanding they are research based, they are full of evidence about exactly what I was talking about in the beginning about why our brains are so vulnerable to disinformation, and that our logical thinking is not separate from our emotions. To the contrary, our emotions absolutely drive our logical thinking. And so, again, cognitive warfare, if I can make you feel angry, shame, all of these other kind of icky feeling emotions, I can make you behave in ways that I want. So he in these books talks about some of that stuff in really digestible, easy, entertaining ways. Um, the other one is one that just came out called Foolproof: Why Misinformation Infects Our Minds and How to Build Immunity. This is by a gentleman named Sander van der Linden. Um, and that's just another great one that's kind of going into what I've been talking about cognitive warfare is not just technology, AI. It is really rooted in the brain and human factors.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah. Excellent suggestions. And we will have links to all of these resources in the show notes. And with that, Tanna Krewson, thank you so much for being a guest on the Cognitive Crucible.
thank you. It's been great talking with you.
The Cognitive Crucible is the only podcast dedicated to increasing interdisciplinary collaboration between information operations practitioners, scholars, and policymakers. To find out more about the Information Professionals Association, visit us at information-professionals.org. Please support our podcast by giving us a 5-star rating and leaving a review.